He stepped in front of flying arrows to save the queen, reached its breathtaking climax as Eli infiltrated the massive steel behemoth war machine, sacrificing his safety once more for Queen Zareth. Racing against time, he destroyed the power core, causing the mighty weapon to collapse upon itself. This decisive action not only saved the city, but forever transformed the relationship between two warring peoples. The vast desert stretched endlessly beneath a copper-red sky, whirling sand obscuring the horizon. The battle between the Fire Empire of Raver and the Terra Alliance forces had reached its climax, turning the already harsh landscape into a hellscape of smoke, fire, and blood. Amidst the chaos, a nameless Terran warrior stood at the edge of the battlefield, his gaze fixed on a singular figure who commanded the Ravorian forces. Queen Zareth was a vision of power, her crimson battle armor reflecting the dying sun, making her appear as if she were ablaze. Her stern expression revealed nothing as she observed the carnage before her, surrounded by her elite guard in their obsidian armor. The Terran warrior narrowed his eyes, noting the way her troops moved with disciplined precision at her slightest gesture. Her reputation for ruthless efficiency was not exaggerated. The winds shifted suddenly, bringing with it an eerie silence that fell across the battlefield. The Terran tensed, his senses heightened by years of combat experience. Something wasn't right. The air itself seemed to vibrate with anticipation. "Assassination!" The warning cry pierced the air, shattering the unnatural quiet. The Terran's gaze snapped toward movement in the dunes to his left, a glint of metal, a shadow where none should be. In that instant, he saw the deadly projectile cutting through the air, a poison-tipped arrow aimed directly at the Queen's heart. Time seemed to slow as he processed what was happening, as he calculated the distance between himself and the monarch, as he made a decision that would alter the course of history. Without conscious thought, he launched himself forward, muscles burning with effort as he raced across the blood-soaked sand. He was dimly aware of shouts, of confusion, of weapons being raised in his direction. None of it mattered. All that existed was the rapidly closing gap between himself and the arrow's deadly path. Queen Zareth turned, alerted by the commotion, her eyes widening slightly as she registered the approaching Terran, an enemy soldier running straight toward her. Her hand moved to her crystal sword, but she was a fraction too slow to react to the true threat. The Terran leapt, his body intersecting the arrow's trajectory. The first arrow struck his shoulder with a sickening thud, the impact spinning him sideways, but not stopping his momentum. Pain exploded through his body as the poison began its work immediately, but he remained focused on his goal. Two more arrows followed in quick succession, fired from hidden positions across the battlefield. The Terran took the second in his side, gasping as it penetrated deep between his ribs. The third embedded itself in his thigh as he crashed to the ground mere feet from the Queen. Despite the agony tearing through him, he forced himself to his feet, staggering as he placed himself between the monarch and the direction of the attack. "Protect the Queen!" came the belated cry from the royal guard, as plasma rifles discharged around them, searching for the hidden assassins. The Terran swayed on his feet, blood flowing freely from his wounds, the poison turning his veins to fire. His vision blurred, but he remained standing, a human shield before the woman he had been taught was his enemy. Zareth stood frozen, her eyes locked on the fallen warrior. The sounds of battle faded around her as she witnessed something she had never expected to see. A Terran soldier, an enemy combatant, sacrificing himself to save her life. She was so stunned by this act that for precious seconds, she forgot the threat still lurking in the dunes, forgot the battle raging around them, forgot everything except the nameless man bleeding before her. "Why?" The question escaped her lips, barely audible amidst the chaos. The Terran's response was lost as he collapsed, consciousness fleeing from him as the poison took hold. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was the Queen's face, Her expression transformed from cold authority to something unreadable, something that might, in another world, have been concern. The aftermath of battle left the majestic Ravorian palace eerily silent. The grand obsidian halls, normally bustling with courtiers and guards, were subdued as news of the assassination attempt spread through whispered conversations. Servants and lower nobles spoke in hushed tones about the nameless one who had saved their queen, their theories growing more elaborate with each retelling. In the royal medical chamber, healers worked tirelessly over the unconscious form of the Terran warrior. His skin had taken on an ashen hue, the poison from the arrows having spread throughout his system, despite their efforts to extract it. The chief healer, an elderly woman with hands gnarled by age but steady in their work, shook her head gravely as she reported to the assembled royal advisors. "The poison is unlike anything I've encountered. It resists our traditional methods. Without intervention beyond our conventional medicine, he will not survive the night." Grand Minister Korvath, the most senior of Queen Zareth's advisors, stroked his long beard thoughtfully. "Perhaps that would be for the best. This Terran represents a security risk we cannot afford. His motivations remain unclear, and keeping an enemy combatant within the palace walls is unprecedented." "I agree," Commander Laxus of the Royal Guard added, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "For all we know, this could be an elaborate ploy to infiltrate our defenses. He should be interrogated for information, then expelled from our borders, if he survives." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathered officials until the chamber doors swung open, silencing them instantly. Queen Zareth entered, her battle armor exchanged for flowing robes of deep crimson and gold, though her bearing was no less regal or intimidating. Her cold gaze swept across the room, noting the expressions that shifted from conviction to uncertainty under her scrutiny. "You speak of interrogation and expulsion," she said, her voice level, but carrying an edge sharp enough to cut. "Is this how Raver repays its debts?" Korvath stepped forward, bowing deeply. "Your Majesty, while the man's actions were undeniably brave, we must consider the broader implications. He is Terran, an enemy. He is the reason I stand before you now," Zareth interrupted, moving to the bedside of the unconscious warrior. "3 poison arrows meant for my heart found his flesh instead. Whatever his motivations, whatever his allegiance, this debt cannot be ignored." "The people will talk, Your Majesty," warned Laxus. "Harboring a Terran within the royal palace sends a dangerous message to our citizens and our enemies alike." "Let them talk," the queen replied dismissively. "I did not build this empire by concerning myself with idle gossip." She turned her attention to the chief healer. "You say our conventional methods are failing. What of unconventional ones?" The elderly woman hesitated, her eyes darting briefly to the other advisors before returning to her sovereign. "There is one possibility, Your Majesty, but it would require your direct intervention. Your life force could neutralize the poison, but the cost to you would be significant. You would be weakened for days, perhaps weeks." A heavy silence fell over the chamber. What the healer proposed was almost unthinkable. For the queen to use her rare life-giving power, normally reserved for the most elite of Ravorian nobility in dire circumstances, on an enemy soldier. Korvath stepped forward again. "Your Majesty, I must strongly advise against this course of action. Your power is sacred, a gift to be used for the benefit of Raver and its people. To expend it on a Terran—" "The decision is made," Zareth cut him off, her tone brooking no further argument. "Leave us, all of you." Reluctantly, the advisors filed out, Korvath's disapproval evident in the stiff set of his shoulders. When the chamber door closed behind the last of them, Zareth turned to the chief healer. "Show me what must be done." The elderly woman guided the queen's hands to rest on the Terran's chest, directly over his heart. "Focus your energy there, Your Majesty. The poison attacks the life force itself, Only another life force can combat it. Zareth closed her eyes, concentrating on the wellspring of energy that resided within her, the genetic gift that had marked her bloodline for generations. She felt it stir, then flow through her hands into the broken body before her. The sensation was strange. She had only used this power a handful of times, and never on a non-Ravorian. There was resistance, as if his body recognized her energy as foreign, but she pushed through it, directing the healing force toward the poison, ravaging his system. Pain shot through her as the connection deepened, the poison attempting to travel back through the link between them. She gritted her teeth, refusing to yield. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as she battled the insidious toxin, her strength waning with each passing moment. Finally, she felt the tide turn. The poison began to recede, overwhelmed by her life energy. The Terran's breathing steadied, color slowly returning to his face. Only when the chief healer gently pulled her hands away did Zareth realize how close she had come to depleting herself entirely. "It is done, Your Majesty," the healer said softly. "The worst of the poison has been neutralized. His own body can fight the rest, with time and care." Zareth nodded, suddenly too exhausted to speak. She rose unsteadily from the bedside, waving away the healer's concerned hands. Before leaving the chamber, she cast one last glance at the sleeping warrior. "Inform me when he wakes," she commanded, then departed to her private quarters to recover from the unexpected bond she had just forged with a man who should have been her enemy. Days passed as the Terran warrior drifted between consciousness and fevered dreams. When he finally awoke fully, it was to the unfamiliar luxury of silk sheets and a soft bed, a stark contrast to the military cots or hard ground he had grown accustomed to. His wounds had been expertly treated, though they still ached deeply when he attempted to move. A young attendant noticed his stirring and hurried from the room. Minutes later, Queen Zareth herself appeared at his bedside, flanked by guards who remained at a discreet distance. "You return to the world of the living," she observed, studying him with intense golden eyes. "The healers were uncertain if you would." The Terran struggled to sit upright, wincing at the pain the movement caused. Why am I here?" His voice was rough from disuse, his throat parched. "You are here because you placed yourself between death and me," Zareth replied simply. "A debt I intend to repay. But first, I would know your name and why a Terran soldier would sacrifice himself for a Ravorian queen." He hesitated, eyes lowering briefly. "Eli," he finally answered. "My name is Eli." As for his reasons, he found them difficult to articulate. How could he explain that in that moment? He had seen not an enemy monarch, but a person in danger. That years of conflict had not erased his fundamental belief in the value of life. "I saw the arrow," he said at last. "I acted. There was no time for allegiances or politics." Zareth's expression remained unreadable, but something in her posture softened almost imperceptibly. A simple answer, yet I suspect the truth is more complex. She moved closer, lowering her voice. "You should know that your presence here has caused considerable discomfort among my advisors. There are those who see you as a threat to be eliminated, or a tool to be exploited." Eli nodded grimly. "I expected as much. I can leave as soon as I'm able." "You misunderstand," the Queen interrupted. "I did not save your life only to cast you back into danger. You will remain here, under my protection, until you are fully recovered. After that..." She trailed off, leaving the future undefined. Before Eli could respond, a commotion erupted in the hallway outside. The Queen's guards immediately moved to defensive positions as Commander Laxus burst into the room. "Your Majesty, forgive the intrusion, but there's been a security breach in the East Wing. You must come immediately." Zareth's demeanor shifted instantly from contemplative to commanding. "Secure this chamber," she ordered her guards. No one enters without my express permission. With a last, measuring look at Eli, she swept from the room, leaving him alone with his thoughts and the growing certainty that his decision to save her had irrevocably altered the course of his life. The night stretched long and quiet in the royal palace of Raver. Most of its inhabitants had retired to their chambers, leaving only the necessary guards at their posts. In the healing wing, Eli had finally managed to fall into a restless sleep, his body still fighting the remnants of poison and trauma. A shadow detached itself from a darkened alcove near his chamber, moving with practiced stealth along the corridor. The assassin had studied the guard rotations meticulously, timing this approach during the brief gap in surveillance. Reaching the chamber door, gloved hands worked quickly with specialized tools to defeat the lock. Inside, Eli stirred at the faint sound. Years of battlefield awareness, bringing him to consciousness despite his weakened state. He remained motionless, eyes barely open, as he assessed the situation. The silhouette entering his room was unfamiliar, not one of his regular attendants or guards, and the hour was wrong for routine checks. The intruder approached his bed, drawing a slender blade that gleamed dully in the dim light. There was no mistaking the intent. Eli tensed, preparing to defend himself despite his injuries, calculating his slim chances against an armed opponent in his condition. Just as the assassin raised the blade, the chamber door burst open again. Queen Zareth stood in the doorway, her crystal sword already drawn and glowing with an inner light. Her expression was thunderous, her stance that of a warrior rather than a monarch. "Step away from him," she commanded, her voice cutting through the darkness. The assassin spun, momentarily surprised, but recovered quickly and lunged toward the queen instead. Zareth parried the attack with practiced ease, the crystal blade singing as it deflected the assassin's weapon. Eli rolled from the bed, ignoring the searing pain from his wounds as he crashed to the floor. He grabbed the only potential weapon within reach, a heavy metal water pitcher from his bedside table. It was crude compared to the blades clashing before him, but it would have to suffice. The fight spilled into the corridor, Zareth driving the assassin backward with precise, powerful strikes. The queen's fighting style was elegant and disciplined, reflecting years of formal training. In contrast, when Eli managed to join the fray, his movements were raw and instinctive, born from survival rather than ceremony. The assassin was skilled, dodging and weaving between their combined attacks, using the confined space of the corridor to their advantage. A quick thrust nearly caught Zareth in the side, but Eli intervened, deflecting the blade with his improvised bludgeon at the cost of a deep gash across his forearm. "Your guard seems eager to collect more wounds on your behalf, Your Majesty," the assassin taunted, voice muffled behind a mask. "How touching that a Terran dog would die for Ravorian royalty." "He is not my guard," Zareth replied coldly, pressing forward with renewed aggression. "And you will not touch him again." The fight intensified, the combatants moving like dancers in a deadly performance along the cold stone corridor. Zareth's crystal sword left trails of light in the darkness, while Eli's makeshift weapon struck with blunt force whenever he found an opening. Their differing styles should have clashed, yet somehow they complemented each other, Zareth's precision creating opportunities for Eli's raw power, his unpredictable movements distracting the assassin from her calculated attacks. The assassin, realizing the disadvantage of facing two opponents, attempted to create separation by hurling a concealed blade at Eli. Zareth reacted instantly, deflecting it with her sword. The momentary distraction was enough for the assassin to slip past her guard, scoring a shallow cut across her shoulder. Zareth did not flinch, did not cry out. Instead, her eyes narrowed dangerously, and the crystal sword in her hand flared brighter. She launched a flurry of attacks that drove the assassin back step by step until they were cornered at the end of the hallway. In a desperate move, the assassin threw a small object to the ground that exploded in a blinding flash of light. Zareth shielded her eyes. But Eli, operating more on instinct than sight, swung his makeshift weapon in a wide arc. The heavy pitcher connected solidly with the assassin's head as they attempted to slip past, sending them crashing to the floor. The sound of running footsteps announced the arrival of palace guards, alerted by the commotion. The assassin, dazed but still conscious, reached for a hidden pouch. Zareth recognized the movement and its implication immediately. "Stop them!" she shouted, lunging forward. But it was too late. The assassin bit down on a concealed capsule, convulsing violently before going still, taking their secrets to the grave. The corridor fell silent, save for the heavy breathing of the survivors. Eli sagged against the wall, his earlier adrenaline fading to leave him acutely aware of his reopened wounds and the fresh cut on his arm. Zareth, despite her minor injury, showed no signs of weakness as she issued rapid commands to the guards. Only when the assassin's body had been removed and the area secured did she turn her attention back to Eli. Without ceremony, she tore a strip of fabric from her own nightrobe and bound the bleeding gash on his arm. "You should have stayed in bed," she said, her tone softer than her words suggested. Eli managed a weak smile. "And missed the opportunity to return the favor? Hardly seems fair to let you have all the fun." Something unexpected happened then. Queen Zareth, renowned for her stoic demeanor, laughed. It was brief and surprised even her, but genuine nonetheless. "You Terrans have a strange definition of fun," she remarked, helping him back toward his chamber. "Though I admit, we fought well together." "We did," Eli agreed, suddenly aware of the warmth of her hands supporting him, of the strange intimacy of the moment. "Thank you for coming when you did. I'm curious how you knew." Zareth's expression became guarded once more. "I have my ways. There are few secrets in this palace that escape my notice." As they reached his chamber, now being thoroughly inspected by security personnel, she added more quietly, "It seems I was right to be concerned about those who might view you as a threat. This changes things. You are no longer merely a patient recovering under my protection. You are now a target." "Story of my life," Eli murmured, wincing as he was helped back to his bed by attending healers who fussed over his fresh injuries. Zareth remained in the doorway, watching thoughtfully. "Rest. We will speak more of this tomorrow. It appears we both have enemies to contend with." As she turned to leave, Eli called after her, "Your Majesty." When she paused, looking back at him, he simply said, "Thank you for saving my life." Again, a ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Consider it partial payment on a debt that grows more interesting by the day." With that cryptic response, she departed, leaving Eli to wonder just what fate had in store for him in this palace of obsidian and secrets. The days that followed the assassination attempt were tense within the palace walls. Security was tightened to unprecedented levels, with Commander Laxus personally overseeing a complete overhaul of the guard rotations and security protocols. Queen Zareth, for her part, spent long hours in closed council meetings, the raised voices occasionally audible through the thick doors. Eli's recovery accelerated, partly due to his own determination, and partly thanks to the exceptional care he received. Within a week, he was able to walk the palace grounds, albeit with a noticeable limp from the arrow wound in his thigh. He was assigned a permanent guard detail, ostensibly for his protection, though he recognized it was equally to monitor his movements. It was during one of his daily walks in the palace gardens that Grand Minister Corvath approached him, dismissing the guards to a discreet distance with a wave of his hand. "The Terran who bleeds for a queen," Corvath said by way of greeting, studying Eli with shrewd eyes. "You've become quite the topic of conversation throughout Ravor." Eli inclined his head slightly, but remained silent, sensing the underlying tension in the minister's seemingly casual approach. "I wonder," Corvath continued, stroking his beard thoughtfully, What the Terra Alliance would think of one of their soldiers becoming so integrated into the Ravorian court. Would they consider it a fortunate infiltration or a treasonous defection? I'm no longer actively serving in the Alliance military, Eli replied carefully. My actions were my own, not representative of Terra's interests. Korvath raised an eyebrow. Is that so? How convenient. Yet you wear no deserter's brand, carry no exile's mark. One might wonder about your true allegiances. My allegiances are to life over death, Minister. Nothing more complex than that. A noble sentiment, Korvath acknowledged with a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. Though perhaps naive in these times of war, Her Majesty has called for the Council of the 12 Matriarchs to convene, the first such gathering in a decade. Your presence has precipitated quite the political crisis. Eli kept his expression neutral, despite his surprise. The Council of Matriarchs was Raver's highest governing body, superseding even the Queen's authority in matters of extraordinary importance. For Zareth to summon them was a significant move with far-reaching implications. I meant no disrespect to Ravorian traditions, he said carefully. And yet you have upended them nonetheless. Korvath gestured toward the palace, where preparations for the council were visibly underway. The Queen intends to present your case before the matriarchs, to argue for official recognition of your service to the crown and, potentially, for your formal integration into Ravorian society. The minister's tone made it clear what he thought of this idea. Such a precedent would be problematic. There are many, both among the nobility and the common people, who view Terrans as enemies, not potential citizens. The assassin who targeted you was merely the most direct expression of this sentiment. And where do you stand, Minister? Eli asked, meeting the older man's gaze steadily. Korvath's smile became more genuine, though no warmer. I am a pragmatist, above all. I serve Raver and its traditions. Queen Zareth is young and, at times, idealistic despite her outward severity. This attachment she has formed to you threatens to destabilize decades of carefully maintained political balance. Attachment? Eli echoed, genuinely caught off guard by the characterization. What else would you call it when a monarch uses her sacred life-giving power on an enemy combatant? When she personally intervenes to save his life not once but twice? When she risks the approval of her council and court to advocate for his acceptance? Korvath shook his head slowly. Whether you intended it or not, you have become a focal point for change in a society that prides itself on constancy. Not everyone welcomes such disruption. Before Eli could respond, a royal herald approached, bowing deeply to Korvath. Grand Minister, Her Majesty requests your presence in the council chamber immediately. The first of the matriarchs has arrived. Korvath nodded dismissal to the herald before turning back to Eli. Consider carefully the position in which you now stand. Terran, your actions may have saved our queen, but they have placed both of you in a precarious political situation. There are powers within Raver that even Zareth must respect, or face consequences she may not be prepared for. With that ominous warning, he departed, leaving Eli to contemplate the unintended ripples his impulsive act of heroism had created throughout the Empire. The Great Hall of Matriarchs was a marvel of Ravorian architecture, its high ceiling supported by columns of polished obsidian that reflected the eternal flames burning in elegant braziers throughout the chamber. Tiered seating surrounded a central speaking platform, creating an amphitheater designed to intimidate those called to address the council. Queen Zareth sat upon her elevated throne at the head of the chamber, watching as the 12 matriarchs took their places. Each represented one of the ancient bloodlines that had founded Raver millennia ago, and each wore the traditional headdress of her lineage, intricate constructions of metal, and precious stones that served as both crown and armor. The atmosphere was tense. Many of the matriarchs had traveled great distances on short notice, and none were pleased by the urgency of the summons. Murmurs filled the hall as they exchanged greetings and speculations, their expressions varying from curiosity to outright hostility as they glanced toward the queen. At precisely midday, Zareth rose, immediately silencing the assembly. Her voice, clear and commanding, filled the vast space without effort. Honored matriarchs, I thank you for answering the call. The matter before us today concerns not only the traditions of Raver, but its future. Matriarch Vena, eldest of the 12 and representative of the most conservative faction, spoke without rising. We have heard rumors, Your Majesty, of a Terran warrior within the palace walls, of royal healing power bestowed upon an enemy, of assassins in the night. Are we to understand that all this disruption stems from a single outsider? The disruption, Zareth countered smoothly, stems from those who would rather see their queen dead than consider new possibilities for our empire. The Terran saved my life at great personal cost. He had no obligation to do so, no allegiance to Raver or its throne. His actions were those of a man who chose to preserve life rather than take it, a principle I would have thought the council might appreciate. Principles are well and good, Matriarch Sora of the Eastern Provinces interjected. But we cannot ignore centuries of conflict with Terra. This man, whatever his individual merits, represents a people who have long sought to undermine Ravorian sovereignty. Does he? Zareth challenged. Or does he represent the possibility that individuals need not be bound by the conflicts of their nations? That perhaps there is more common ground between our peoples than we have allowed ourselves to see? The debate intensified, with matriarchs arguing passionately on both sides. Some, like Vena, insisted that tradition demanded the Terran be treated as an enemy combatant, regardless of his actions. Others, particularly those from regions that had suffered most in the ongoing conflict, were more receptive to Zareth's perspective, seeing potential value in exploring peaceful interaction. As the discussion grew heated, the great doors at the rear of the chamber swung open. A royal messenger rushed in, kneeling before the queen with obvious distress. Your Majesty, forgive the interruption, but an urgent matter requires your attention. The Noble House's alliance has mobilized their forces and is approaching the capital. They demand the immediate surrender of the Terran and claim that his presence violates the ancient laws of blood purity. Stunned silence fell over the assembly, followed by an eruption of voices as the matriarchs reacted to this unprecedented development. The Noble Houses, while technically subject to the crown, controlled significant military resources and had maintained semi-autonomous status for generations. Their direct challenge to royal authority was nothing short of insurrection. Zareth's expression hardened, her earlier diplomatic tone giving way to cold fury. How dare they presume to dictate terms to their queen? How many forces have they brought? Reports indicate 3 battalions, Your Majesty, including the steel behemoth war machine, the messenger replied, his voice trembling slightly at the mention of the legendary weapon. Murmurs of alarm spread through the chamber. The steel behemoth was a massive, armored vehicle capable of decimating city walls and withstanding conventional weapons. Its deployment signaled that the noble houses were prepared for full-scale conflict. This is madness, Matriarch Lyrella of the Western Isles exclaimed. To bring such a weapon against the capital over a single Terran? The noble houses overstep their bounds. They use the Terran as a pretext, Grand Minister Korvath observed, having risen from his seat near the throne. This is a power play, one they have likely been planning for some time. The presence of an outsider within the palace simply provided them with a convenient justification. Queen Zareth stood, her decision made. The council will recess until this threat is addressed. I will not deliberate under duress or threat of violence. Matriarchs, you are welcome to remain within the protection of the palace or return to your provinces, as you see fit. As the chamber erupted into chaotic discussion, Zareth descended from her throne and strode toward the exit, gesturing for Commander Laxus to follow. In the corridor outside, she found Eli waiting, his face grim. "I heard," he said simply. "This is because of me. This is because of their ambition and my refusal to bend to it." Zareth corrected him. "You are merely the excuse. Nevertheless, I can end this. Let me surrender myself to them. One life is not worth a battle that could cost hundreds." Zareth's golden eyes flashed dangerously. "Is that what you think this is about? One life? This is about the future of Raver, whether it will be ruled by its rightful queen or by a coalition of power-hungry nobles who would drag us further into isolationism and war." She turned to Commander Laxus. "Prepare our forces. I want the city walls reinforced and civilian evacuation procedures initiated for the sectors nearest the gates." "Yes, Your Majesty," Laxus acknowledged with a bow before departing to carry out her orders. Zareth faced Eli again, studying him with an intensity that made him want to look away, though he held her gaze steadily. "You once placed yourself between me and death without hesitation," she said quietly. "Now I ask for your help more directly. Will you stand with Raver, with me, against those who would use your presence as an excuse for rebellion?" Eli considered the request carefully. By actively taking up arms alongside the Queen's forces, he would be making a definitive choice. No longer a neutral party caught in political crossfire, but a combatant fighting for Raver against other Ravorians. The implications for his identity, his past, and any potential future with his own people were profound. Yet, looking at Zareth, he recognized something in her that transcended national boundaries and old hatreds, a vision for something better than the endless cycle of conflict that had defined relations between their peoples for generations. In saving her life, he had inadvertently committed himself to her path, whatever it might be. "I will," he answered simply. Relief briefly softened her expression before the mask of royal authority returned. "Then we have preparations to make. The noble houses have overplayed their hand in bringing the steel behemoth. It may be powerful, but it is not invincible, especially if one knows its weaknesses." "And you do?" A rare smile curved Zareth's lips. "Why do you think they're so afraid of Terra? Your people's technology has advanced in ways ours has not. The behemoth was designed to counter conventional Ravorian weapons, not Terran tactics. Your perspective may be exactly what we need." As they walked briskly through the palace corridors toward the war room, Eli realized that for the first time since he had leapt in front of those poison arrows, he felt a sense of purpose beyond mere survival. Whether by fate or chance, he had become part of something larger than himself, a potential turning point in the history of two warring peoples. And at the center of it all was the enigmatic queen who had saved his life as surely as he had saved hers. The capital city of Raver, Obsidian Crown, had been built for defense. Its concentric walls of black stone rose imposingly against the desert landscape, dotted with watchtowers and defensive positions that had repelled invaders for centuries. Now, these ancient fortifications faced a threat from within, as the armies of the noble houses approached from the east, their banners snapping in the hot desert wind. From his position on the outer wall, Eli could see the advancing forces clearly, 3 distinct battalions, each bearing the colors and insignia of a different noble house. At their center, dwarfing the soldiers around it, was the steel behemoth. The war machine lived up to its name, a monstrous construction of metal and technology that crawled across the sand on massive treads, its weapon systems gleaming menacingly in the harsh sunlight. "Impressive, isn't it?" Queen Zareth's voice came from behind him as she joined him at the battlements. She had exchanged her formal robes for battle armor once again, the crimson metal catching the light like freshly spilled blood. "The behemoth was created during my grandfather's reign, when the threat from Terra was at its peak. Ironic that it should now be turned against the crown it was meant to protect." Eli nodded grimly. "We had stories about it in the Alliance, a metal monster that could break through any defense. Most soldiers thought it was an exaggeration. "It's not," Zareth confirmed. "But every weapon has its weakness. The behemoth's power core is its vulnerability, a specialized energy crystal housed in the central chamber. Destroy that, and the entire machine becomes useless. The problem has always been reaching it through the layers of armor and defense systems." Commander Laxus approached, saluting sharply before providing his report. "Your Majesty, our forces are in position. The civilian evacuation is proceeding as ordered, though several of the matriarchs have chosen to remain in the palace as a show of support." "And the others?" "Departed for their provinces, claiming neutrality in what they term a regrettable internal dispute." Laxus's tone made it clear what he thought of their reluctance to choose sides. Zareth's expression hardened. "They will be remembered for their absence when this is resolved." She turned back to survey the approaching army. "What is your assessment, Commander?" "They outnumber us nearly 2-1, Your Majesty, and the behemoth gives them a significant tactical advantage. Our best hope is to hold the walls long enough for reinforcements from the loyal provinces to arrive." "And how long would that be?" 3 days, at minimum." Zareth shook her head. "Too long. We cannot subject the city to a prolonged siege." She turned to Eli. "You've faced Ravorian forces in battle. What would your approach be against the behemoth?" Eli considered the question carefully, aware of Laxus's skeptical gaze. "Terra has never developed anything comparable to the behemoth because our strategy emphasizes mobility over raw power. Against something like that, we'd focus on disabling its navigation and weapon systems using targeted electromagnetic pulses or precision strikes at junction points." He pointed toward the advancing war machine. "Those sensor arrays on its flanks are vulnerable. They need to be exposed to gather data. A small, fast team could potentially approach from multiple angles and plant disruptive devices. It wouldn't destroy the behemoth, but it might blind it long enough for a more direct assault on the power core." Laxus snorted. "A fine theory, but those sensor arrays are protected by automated defense turrets. Any approach would be suicide." "Not necessarily," Zareth interjected, her eyes lighting with sudden inspiration. "What if the approach came from above, rather than across the ground?" Both men looked at her questioningly. "The palace aviary," she explained. "The messenger birds are trained to fly through combat conditions without deviating from their course. If we attached your disruptive devices to them and directed them toward the sensor arrays—" Eli nodded slowly, seeing the potential in her suggestion. "It could work. The birds would be too small and fast for the automated defenses to target effectively, but we'd still need a team ready to exploit the opportunity once the behemoth is temporarily disabled." "I will lead that team," Zareth declared, silencing Laxus's immediate protest with a raised hand. "This is my city, my people under threat. I will not hide behind walls while others fight my battles." "Then I'm coming with you," Eli said firmly. Zareth studied him for a moment before nodding. "Your knowledge of the behemoth's vulnerabilities may prove decisive." Laxus, recognizing the futility of arguing further, sighed heavily. "I'll assemble our best fighters to accompany you, Your Majesty, and I'll prepare the birds from the aviary as you suggested." As the commander departed to make the necessary arrangements, Zareth and Eli remained at the battlements, watching as the enemy forces drew ever closer to the city walls. "You realize," Eli said quietly, "that if we succeed, it will change everything. The noble houses will not forgive such a defeat easily." "If we fail, there will be nothing to forgive," Zareth replied simply. "But yes, I understand the consequences. Ravor cannot continue, as it has been, isolated, stagnant, clinging to traditions that no longer serve its people. This conflict was inevitable, with or without your presence as a catalyst." She turned to him, the setting sun casting her features in sharp relief. "You once asked why I saved your life. The truth is, I saw in your action, in your willingness to bleed for someone you had been taught to hate, a vision of what could be possible if we moved beyond ancient enmities. That vision is worth fighting for, worth risking everything to protect. Eli found himself momentarily speechless, moved by the passion in her words and the intensity of her gaze. Before he could formulate a response, a horn sounded from the enemy lines, the traditional Ravorian signal for parley. "It seems they wish to talk before they attack," Zareth observed, her expression cooling once more into regal detachment. "Let us hear what terms they offer, though I suspect we already know." The delegation from the noble houses approached under a flag of truce, led by Lord Kirill, head of House Vex and long-standing opponent of Zareth's progressive policies. The meeting took place in the neutral ground between the city walls and the assembled army, with small contingents from both sides present as witnesses and protection. Lord Kirill, resplendent in the traditional armor of his house, bowed with barely concealed insincerity as Zareth approached, Eli and Commander Laxus flanking her protectively. "Your Majesty," Kirill greeted her, his gaze sliding dismissively over Eli. "I see the rumors of your unusual companion are true." "State your purpose, Lord Kirill," Zareth replied coldly. "You bring an army to my doorstep and then request parley. What is it you hope to achieve through this display?" Kirill straightened, his voice carrying for the benefit of all witnesses. "The noble houses of Raver have convened an emergency session and found the current situation untenable. The presence of a Terran within the royal court, given access to our secrets and technologies, represents an existential threat to our way of life." He produced a scroll bearing multiple seals, presumably those of the noble houses supporting his position. "We hereby formally request that you surrender the Terran for proper interrogation and trial under the ancient laws of blood purity. Additionally, we ask that you reaffirm your commitment to Ravorian traditions by renouncing any policies that would diminish the status of noble bloodlines or reduce the separation between our empire and foreign powers." "And if I refuse?" Zareth asked, though the answer was evident in the assembled forces behind Kirill. "Then, with the deepest regret, the noble houses will be forced to take action to protect Raver from policies we believe threaten its fundamental character and security." Kirill's expression conveyed no regret whatsoever. "We do not wish to depose you, Your Majesty, merely to guide you back to the path of tradition." Zareth's laugh was sharp and without humor. "How generous! You threaten my city with destruction and call it guidance." She stepped closer to Kirill, her voice dropping to ensure only he could hear her next words. "I know this isn't about the Terran, Kirill. This is about power, your fear of losing it as our society evolves. You use tradition as a shield for your ambition, but history will remember who truly stood for Raver today." Raising her voice again for all to hear, she declared, "I reject your terms absolutely. The Terran remains under my protection, and the policies of my reign will continue to serve the best interests of all Ravorians, not merely those of noble birth. If you wish to change this, you will have to remove me from my throne, and I assure you, I will not make that easy." Kirill's face flushed with anger, but he maintained his composure. "So be it. You have until dawn to reconsider. After that, we will have no choice but to act." As the delegation withdrew, Eli moved closer to Zareth. "You could have bought time by pretending to consider their demands." "To what end?" she asked, watching Kirill's retreating form with contempt. "They have shown their hand. Now we must play ours decisively." She turned to Commander Laxus. "Is everything prepared for our plan?" "Yes, Your Majesty. The birds are being fitted with the devices now, and I've selected the strike team. We can move as soon as darkness falls." Zareth nodded, her determination evident in every line of her body. "Then we proceed as planned. Let them believe we will wait until dawn to respond. It will make our night attack all the more unexpected. As they returned to the city to make their final preparations, Eli found himself studying the queen with newfound admiration. In the face of overwhelming odds, she remained unbowed, her courage and conviction unshakable. For the first time since finding himself in this strange situation, he felt not just gratitude toward her for saving his life, but a deeper connection, a shared purpose that transcended their different origins. The battle that was to come would test them both in ways neither could fully anticipate. But in that moment, walking beside her toward an uncertain future, Eli knew with absolute certainty that he was exactly where he needed to be. Night fell over Obsidian Crown, bringing with it a tense silence broken only by the distant sounds of the noble house's army preparing for the dawn assault. Within the city walls, however, activity continued under cover of darkness as Queen Zareth's plan was set in motion. In the royal aviary, Eli worked alongside Ravorian technicians to attach small, specially designed disruptive devices to the messenger birds. The devices, hastily constructed from components scavenged throughout the palace, were crude but potentially effective, designed to emit localized electromagnetic pulses that would temporarily disable the behemoth's sensitive sensor arrays. "Will they work?" Zareth asked, entering the aviary to inspect their progress. She had exchanged her formal battle armor for more practical attire, a form-fitting suit of lightweight protective material that would allow for greater mobility during their mission. Eli secured the final device to a bird's leg harness before answering. "They should, in theory. The pulse range is limited, but if the birds get close enough to the target areas, it should create enough of a blind spot for our approach." "And if they don't?" He met her gaze steadily. "Then we improvise." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "A very Terran approach." "It served us well enough against Ravorian forces in the past," he replied, matching her wry tone. Commander Laxus appeared at the aviary entrance, interrupting their exchange. "The strike team is assembled and ready, Your Majesty. We should move into position within the hour to take advantage of the deepest part of the night." Zareth nodded, her expression becoming serious once more. "Release the birds first. We'll time our approach to coincide with the expected disruption of the behemoth systems." As they made their final preparations, Eli found himself reflecting on the strange path that had led him to this moment. Months ago, he had been just another soldier in the Terra Alliance forces, distinguished only by his growing disillusionment with the seemingly endless conflict. His impulsive decision to save an enemy monarch had transformed his life in ways he could never have anticipated, placing him at the center of a potential turning point in Ravorian history. The strike team assembled at a hidden postern gate on the eastern wall of the city. Besides Zareth, Eli, and Commander Laxus, it consisted of 6 elite royal guards, each chosen for their speed and combat prowess. All were armed with a combination of traditional Ravorian weapons and the few pieces of Terran technology that Eli had been able to modify for their use. "The birds have been released," a messenger reported, slightly breathless from his run through the city. "They should reach the behemoth's sensor arrays within minutes." Zareth nodded acknowledgement before addressing the assembled team. "Our objective is clear: disable the behemoth permanently by destroying its power core. This mission carries extreme risk, but success will save countless lives and preserve the sovereignty of the crown. Commander Laxus will lead the initial approach. I will direct the final assault on the core chamber. The Terran, Eli, will provide tactical guidance based on his knowledge of the machine's vulnerabilities." She looked each member of the team in the eye before continuing. "What we do tonight will be remembered in Ravorian history for generations to come. Let us ensure it is remembered as a triumph of courage over tyranny." With that, she gave the signal to proceed. The gate opened silently, and the team slipped out into the darkness, moving swiftly across the open ground toward the enemy encampment. The noble house's army had established a perimeter around the behemoth, with regular patrols circling the massive war machine. As the strike team approached, they could see the birds diving toward the sensor arrays, mounted on the behemoth's flanks. Small flashes of light indicated the devices activating, and almost immediately, the war machine's defensive turrets began firing erratically, targeting phantom threats or ceasing function altogether. "Now!" Laxus whispered, and the team surged forward, using the confusion created by the malfunctioning systems to slip past the perimeter guards. They reached the base of the behemoth without detection, pressing themselves against its metal hull to avoid the searchlights sweeping the area as guards tried to determine the cause of the system failures. Up close, the war machine was even more imposing, towering stories above them, its armor plating scarred from previous battles, but still formidably intact. Eli pointed to a maintenance hatch near ground level. "That's our entry point. It leads to the service corridors that run throughout the lower levels. From there, we can make our way to the central chamber where the power core is housed." Laxus signaled two of his guards forward. They worked quickly to bypass the hatch's security measures, using tools specifically designed for this purpose. Within minutes, the hatch swung open, revealing a narrow corridor illuminated by emergency lighting. "I'll go first," Eli volunteered, familiar with the layout from tactical briefings during his time with the Alliance forces. Zareth nodded her approval, and he slipped into the opening, the others following closely behind. The interior of the behemoth was a maze of corridors, chambers, and machinery, the air hot and thick with the smell of oil and ozone. They moved as quietly as possible, aware that the effects of the birds' disruptive devices would be temporary. Twice they were forced to hide as maintenance crews hurried past, working to restore the behemoth systems to full functionality. As they approached the central sections of the war machine, resistance increased. A patrol of guards intercepted them at a junction, leading to a brief but intense skirmish. The Royal Guards fought with silent efficiency, disabling the enemy without raising an alarm, but one of their own was wounded in the process. "Continue with the mission," the injured guard insisted, when Zareth paused beside him. "I'll cover the retreat path." With reluctance, the Queen nodded, and the reduced team pressed on. They were close to their objective now. Eli could feel the vibration of the power core through the metal floor beneath them, a deep, rhythmic pulse that seemed to echo the beating heart of the machine. They reached a sealed blast door, marking the entrance to the core chamber. Unlike the maintenance hatch, this would not be easily bypassed. It was designed specifically to protect the behemoth's most vulnerable component from exactly the kind of attack they were attempting. "The control panel requires a specific authorization code," Laxus observed, examining the security system. "Without it, forcing entry will trigger alarms throughout the behemoth." Zareth turned to Eli. "Options." He studied the door thoughtfully, then examined the surrounding walls. These vessels were designed to withstand external attacks, but the internal barriers assumed authorized personnel. The walls adjacent to the core chamber are reinforced, but... He ran his hands along a section of paneling near the floor. "Here. This is a conduit housing for power distribution. It should run directly into the chamber." Working quickly, he and one of the guards removed the panel, revealing a narrow tunnel filled with cables and pipes. "It's tight, but someone could squeeze through. Once inside, they could open the door from the other side." Laxus immediately volunteered. "I'll go." "No," Eli countered. "I'm the only one who knows exactly what to look for once inside the core chamber. It has to be me." Before either Zareth or Laxus could argue, he had already begun removing his outer gear to fit into the confined space. "If I'm not back in 5 minutes, or if you hear alarms, get out. The plan's compromised at that point, and you'll need to retreat before they lock down the entire behemoth." Zareth caught his arm as he prepared to enter the conduit. "Be careful," she said simply, her golden eyes reflecting the emergency lights. Eli nodded once, then slipped into the narrow passage, inching his way forward through the tangle of cables. The space was even tighter than it had appeared, and several times he had to contort his body to navigate around junctions and support structures. The heat was intense, the air stifling and thick with the smell of hot metal and insulation. After what felt like an eternity, he reached the end of the conduit where it opened into the core chamber itself. Carefully, he eased himself out of the opening, finding himself in a vast circular room dominated by the pulsing power core at its center, a massive crystal structure suspended within a complex framework of support systems and energy conduits. The chamber was not unguarded. 2 technicians monitored control stations on the far side, their attention focused on displays showing the status of the behemoth systems. Eli froze, assessing his options. He needed to disable those technicians without alerting them to his presence, then open the blast door for the rest of the team. Moving silently around the perimeter of the chamber, keeping to the shadows cast by the massive machinery, he approached the first technician from behind. A quick, practiced movement rendered the man unconscious, but as he lowered the body to the floor, the second technician turned, eyes widening in alarm. Eli lunged, but not quickly enough to prevent the man from reaching for an alarm switch. The chamber filled with a deafening siren as security protocols activated. Cursing, Eli knocked the second technician unconscious, then raced to the internal door controls, overriding the security lock to allow his team entry. The blast door slid open, revealing Zareth, Laxus, and the remaining guards, weapons drawn and ready for the increased resistance they knew would now be coming. "Change of plans," Eli shouted over the alarm. "We don't have time for a controlled deactivation of the core. We need to overload it, force a catastrophic failure that will render the behemoth permanently inoperable." "How?" Zareth demanded, moving to his side as Laxus positioned the guards to defend their position against the inevitable response. Eli pointed to the control stations. "We need to disable the safety protocols, then introduce a power surge through the main conduits. It will destabilize the crystal structure, causing it to fracture. Once that happens, we have minutes at most to clear the behemoth before the chain reaction becomes irreversible." They worked rapidly, Eli guiding Zareth through the process of bypassing the safety systems while he reprogrammed the power distribution controls. Behind them, the sounds of combat erupted as the first security team arrived, engaging with Laxus and the royal guards in the corridor outside the chamber. "Almost there," Eli muttered, fingers flying over the control interface. "One more override and—" The entire behemoth shuddered violently as the power core began to destabilize, the crystal at its center developing visible fractures that spread like lightning across its surface. Warning lights flashed throughout the chamber, and an automated voice announced evacuation protocols. "Time to go," Eli said grimly, grabbing Zareth's arm and pulling her toward the exit where Laxus was desperately holding their escape route open against increasing opposition. They fought their way back through the corridors, the behemoth's crew now in full evacuation mode around them. The confusion worked to their advantage, allowing them to blend with the general chaos as personnel rushed to escape the dying war machine. As they neared the exit point, another violent tremor shook the structure, sending them stumbling against the walls. The power fluctuated, emergency lighting cutting in and out as the core's destabilization accelerated. "We're not going to make it back to the hatch in time," Laxus shouted, steadying himself against a bulkhead. "We need another way out." Eli scanned their surroundings, mind racing through the behemoth schematics he had studied. "This way," he decided, leading them down a different corridor. "There's an emergency evacuation point for the command crew near here." They reached a chamber with a large hatch in the ceiling, clearly designed for rapid evacuation of high-ranking personnel. The mechanism was already active, with crew members climbing an extended ladder to reach the surface. Joining the evacuation flow, the strike team made their way upward, emerging onto the top of the behemoth just as another, Stronger tremor rocked the massive vehicle. Around them, crew members were sliding down emergency cables or jumping to the ground below, desperate to put distance between themselves and the failing machine. "Jump!" Eli shouted, as the surface beneath them began to buckle. One by one, they leapt from the behemoth, landing heavily on the sand below, before scrambling to their feet and running as fast as they could away from the doomed war machine. They had barely reached what Eli judged to be a safe distance when the behemoth's power core finally gave way completely. The explosion was less dramatic than might have been expected. A series of muffled thumps, followed by a high-pitched whine as the crystal shattered, releasing its stored energy in a controlled implosion rather than an outward blast. The massive war machine seemed to collapse in on itself, its structure crumpling like paper as internal systems failed catastrophically. What had once been the pride of Ravorian military technology was reduced to a twisted heap of metal within minutes, rendered permanently useless by the destruction of its irreplaceable power source. In the stunned silence that followed, Zareth turned to Eli, her expression a mixture of disbelief and triumph. "You did it," she said softly. "We did it," he corrected her, suddenly aware of the cuts and bruises he had accumulated during their escape, the exhaustion threatening to overwhelm him now that the immediate danger had passed. Around them, the noble house's army was in disarray, their primary weapon neutralized, their leadership thrown into confusion by this unexpected turn of events. From the city walls, a cheer arose as the defenders witnessed the behemoth's destruction, the sound carrying across the desert to where the small strike team stood. Zareth straightened, her regal bearing returning as she surveyed the chaotic scene before her. "Commander Laxus, signal the main force. It's time to press our advantage while they're disorganized." As Laxus moved to comply, she turned back to Eli. "This victory belongs to you as much as to any Ravorian. When we return to the city, I intend to make that clear to all." Before he could respond, they were surrounded by royal guards who had sallied forth from the city upon seeing the behemoth's destruction. The strike team was escorted back within the walls, hailed as heroes by the citizens who lined the streets to witness their return. In the days that followed, the noble house's rebellion collapsed with remarkable speed, without the behemoth to give them a decisive military advantage, and with public opinion turning sharply against them following Queen Zareth's victory. Many of the lesser houses quickly pledged renewed loyalty to the crown. The leaders of the insurrection, including Lord Kirill, were taken into custody to await judgment. The Council of the 12 Matriarchs reconvened, this time with a decidedly different atmosphere than their previous session. Those who had fled the capital returned, eager to associate themselves with the Queen's triumph, while those who had remained loyal throughout the crisis enjoyed enhanced status and influence. 1 week after the destruction of the behemoth, Queen Zareth summoned the people of Obsidian Crown to the Grand Plaza for an unprecedented public ceremony. Rumors had spread throughout the city about its purpose, but few could have predicted what actually transpired. The plaza was filled to capacity, with citizens from all levels of Ravorian society gathered to witness the event. The matriarchs were seated on a raised platform, along with the highest-ranking military officers and government officials. At the center of it all stood Queen Zareth, resplendent in full ceremonial regalia, the crystal sword of her lineage at her side. Eli was brought forward, still somewhat uncomfortable with the attention focused upon him. He had been provided with new clothing for the occasion, a unique blend of traditional Ravorian style with subtle elements that acknowledged his Terran origins. As he approached the Queen, the crowd fell silent, tens of thousands of eyes watching this unprecedented interaction between their monarch and a former enemy. "Kneel," Zareth commanded, her voice carrying effortlessly across the plaza. Eli complied, dropping to one knee before her, his head bowed in respect. "7 cycles ago," Zareth began, addressing not just Eli, but the entire assembled crowd. "This man, a soldier of Terra, made a choice that defied expectation and transcended the boundaries we have long established between our peoples. He placed himself between death and a queen not his own, taking upon himself wounds meant for me. She drew her crystal sword, the blade catching the sunlight and scattering it in prismatic patterns across the plaza. In the days that followed, he fought alongside us against those who would use hatred and fear to control our future. He bled again for Raver, risking everything to destroy the weapon that threatened our city and our sovereignty. The sword descended gently to touch Eli's right shoulder, then his left, a traditional Ravorian gesture of honor and recognition. By my authority as Queen of Raver, I name you Eli, Knight of the Living Flame, Protector of the Realm, and honored ally of the crown. Rise and be recognized. As Eli stood, attendants approached, bearing ceremonial garments that symbolized his new status, a mantle of deep crimson embroidered with the royal insignia, and a medallion depicting a flame fashioned from rare metals found only in Ravorian soil. The crowd's response was immediate and overwhelming, a thunderous roar of approval that echoed through the plaza and beyond, reaching every corner of the city. It was a sound unlike any that had been heard in Obsidian Crown's long history, the spontaneous, unified voice of a people embracing change rather than fearing it. Not everyone shared in the enthusiasm. Of course, several of the matriarchs maintained stony expressions throughout the ceremony, their disapproval evident in their rigid postures and averted gazes. Some nobles pointedly departed before the proceedings concluded, a silent protest against what they viewed as a dangerous departure from tradition. But they were the minority. The tide had turned, not just against the failed rebellion, but against the isolationist policies and rigid class structures that had defined Ravorian society for generations, in saving their queen and helping to defeat those who would overthrow her. Eli had become a symbol of new possibilities, a living bridge between worlds, long divided by conflict and mistrust. As the ceremony concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Zareth stepped closer to Eli, speaking so that only he could hear her words. "You once asked why I saved your life," she said quietly. "Now you know. Some debts cannot be measured or repaid in conventional terms. Some connections transcend the boundaries we create between ourselves and others." Eli nodded, understanding at last the full significance of what had transpired between them. Not just a series of life-saving exchanges, but the foundation of something with the potential to transform both their worlds. "What happens now?" he asked. Zareth's expression softened slightly, a rare glimpse of the woman beneath the royal facade. "Now, Knight of the Living Flame, we build upon what we have begun. The path will not be easy. There are many who still cling to old hatreds and fears. But we have shown what is possible when courage overrides caution and compassion transcends conflict." She gestured toward the city, spread out below the plaza, the sun setting behind its ancient walls, casting long shadows across the desert beyond. "Raver has stood isolated for too long, trapped in traditions that once protected us, but now limit what we might become. Perhaps it took an outsider's perspective to help us see that truth." As they looked out over the city together, Eli realized that his impulsive act, leaping in front of those arrows to save a woman he had been taught to view as an enemy, had set in motion changes neither of them could have anticipated. Whatever the future held, whether peace or continued challenges, he knew that his place was here, helping to build the bridge between their peoples that had begun with a single, selfless moment. Years passed, and throughout the Ravorian Empire, images of the moment became commonplace. Etchings, paintings, and sculptures depicting the Terran kneeling before the queen, receiving the honor that had once been unimaginable for an outsider. The story was told and retold, embellished in some tellings, simplified in others, but always maintaining its essential truth, that a single act of courage had transformed an empire. Eli, Knight of the Living Flame, became a living legend. His presence in the royal court a constant reminder of the power of individual choice to alter the course of history. Some still resented him, viewing his elevated status as an affront to tradition, but many more saw in him the embodiment of a new era, one in which ancient enmities gave way to mutual respect and cooperation. Queen Zareth's reign entered what historians would later call its Golden Age, marked by gradual but significant reforms that opened Ravr to greater interaction with neighboring realms, including cautious diplomatic overtures to the Terra Alliance. The path was not without obstacles. Generations of conflict could not be erased overnight, and there were setbacks and resistance on both sides. But the direction was clear, and increasingly irreversible. And through it all, the Queen never forgot the man who had bled for her, the unlikely guardian who had stepped into the path of flying arrows and changed everything. Their bond, forged in blood and battle, remained unbroken, a personal connection that mirrored the larger reconciliation they both worked to achieve. As the desert sun set on another day in Obsidian Crown, crowds gathered in the central plaza, as they did each year on the anniversary of that fateful ceremony. They came to honor not just a historical event, but an enduring lesson: that loyalty knows no boundaries, that compassion can overcome hatred, and that a single moment of selfless courage can ignite a flame that burns forever in the hearts and minds of those who witness it. In the gathering twilight, the monument at the center of the plaza seemed almost to come alive, a larger-than-life bronze depiction of a man kneeling before a queen, offering not submission, but protection, not servitude, but alliance. And though the actual words exchanged between them that day had never been recorded, the meaning was clear to all who beheld it. Some debts can never truly be repaid, but they can be honored through lives dedicated to the principles they represent. The story of the nameless Terran who saved a queen and the monarch who never forgot his sacrifice had become more than history. It had become legend, a foundation myth for a new understanding between peoples once divided by war and mistrust. And in that transformation lay its greatest power: the ability to inspire future generations to see beyond the artificial boundaries of nation and bloodline to the common humanity that unites all who walk beneath the stars.